Happy New Year from the Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
We all got hip a while ago to the fact that just using a Mac does not keep you safe from security pitfalls. That said, 2016 brought a lot of vulnerabilities that would be new to Mac users and perhaps new to computer users in general. Now, 2017 is just days away, and so we thought we would take a look back on some of the important Mac security issues throughout 2016. While Mac users have been targeted pretty heavily in 2016, Apple has done a lot to protect the Mac community. And so the events we're hitting today are sort of a combination of those two things. On the checklist this week, ransomware, and it's, hard target on the Mac OS this year. Mac adware is here to stay, and it has gotten sneakier. We'll look at Trojans and spyware and backdoors. Oh my. We'll look at Apple's bug bounty program. And finally, a file vault issue that hit, oh golly, this would be hot off the presses if people actually still used presses. Let's go ahead and start right at the very top, guys. Ransomware. We've talked about ransomware quite a bit on this show, and we've only been doing this show for about 3 or 4 months. So yeah, this has come on as a big topic this year.
So ransomware started targeting Mac OS earlier in March and then late August again. We've covered ransomware before, like you said, and it's nothing new. It's been targeting Windows users for years now. One thing that was new in 2016, however, was that ransomware started targeting Mac users. So, quick refresher on what ransomware does. After infecting a computer, ransomware locks important documents and files by encrypting them. The user is then alerted that their files are being held ransom, and the attacker will only provide the decryption key if they pay a ransom, usually in a hard-to-trace cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin. Well, with the properly implemented encryption algorithm, it's almost impossible to unlock the files without the decryption key. Generally, the attacker will provide a short window, typically 3 days, during which the infected user could pay the ransom. After the time's up, the attacker will throw away the decryption key, and the files will be locked forever. So there's 2 different ransomware attacks. They're about 6 months apart. They took aim at Mac users looking to download the Transmission BitTorrent client. Now, these attacks were unique for a few different reasons. First, this reflected the first widespread ransomware attack targeting Mac users. Previously, there had been some proof of concept ransomware, but nothing serious had appeared in the wild prior to KeyRanger and Kidnap, which is always fun to say. Second, the malware targeted users looking to download the Transmission app directly from the developer's website, something that's normally safe to do. Third, the attacker or attackers were able to compromise Transmission's official download server not only once but twice, showing that the Transmission developers may have not fully locked down their servers after the initial attack. Luckily, both attacks were spotted pretty quickly, which limited the number of users that were exposed to this ransomware attack.
Not to call those guys out specifically, but I guess you kind of have to, right? I mean, that's a fairly scary thing to think about. I mean, like if I go to Microsoft's site to download something, I know it's from Microsoft, and so Microsoft is big enough that they're going to back it up, theoretically. I'm trying to think about... There was another one. Well, like Adobe. You have to go to Adobe's site. If you still use Flash on your Mac, you're very familiar now with how it is that Adobe Flash, how Flash Reader gets updated, because they're issuing a new patch, it seems like every other day. But at least you know when you actually go through the proper system. I mean, you can see that, okay, well, I know this is going to be safe. I don't know how much longer Flash will be safe for me, but at least I know that this build that I'm getting from this company is going to be a safe thing. It kind of not kosher, right? Remind me, the BitTorrent, the one in particular that you're talking about is staffed by volunteers, right? There's not like a money component to it, so there's not necessarily, I mean, while the volunteers may be completely good-hearted and completely honest and completely trying their best, I mean, you don't have the same sort of resources or backup that you have from like a Microsoft or an Apple or, heck, I don't know, even something like an Adobe or a Spotify.
Exactly. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's still, we always recommend you download your apps directly from the developer's website. Don't pirate apps. Don't go to the third-party random download sites if at all possible. Go to trusted download sites or the developer site directly. And in this case, even users who were practicing good security by doing so still managed to get infected.
Item number 2 on today's checklist, Mac adware and its sort of newfound sneakiness, I guess. It's getting is it getting tougher for like me to stop? Is it getting tougher for, well, why don't I just, I'll do the topic again. Mac adware and its sneakiness. Please enlighten me.
All right. Well, adware targeting Mac users is nothing new. 2016 did see some new developments in how adware tried to trick Mac users into installing it, as well as showing some more resistance to the typical removal steps needed to kind of clean it up off a system. Back in mid-March, typo squatters set up a large number of domains ending in .om instead of .com to try and catch people who made a small typo when trying to visit Gmail or Macy's or Citibank. So instead of going to gmail.com, if they went to gmail.om, it was a fake site, obviously. A user was prompted to download a Flash Player update, which, of course, wasn't really Flash Player update because it wasn't Adobe's site. It was adware, and it was well-known Mac adware. So it was just kind of reflecting a new way to get unsuspecting users to download this adware. More recently, in early November, adware peddlers bought a number of ads to appear at the top of the results list when users searched for Google Chrome. So the download link, the way the ad was set up, would appear to be legitimate. It made it look like the link was actually going to Google's site. When Mac users in particular, clicked the link, again, ended up downloading adware. In this particular case, once the user installed the adware, it would open a scareware page on their browser, popping up alerts and saying, your Mac is infected with something other than the adware you just installed. Pay us lots of money and we'll clean up this problem that doesn't really exist, again, besides the adware you just installed. So that was kind of, another way to trick users, not once but twice in the same go. 2016 also saw a brand new piece of adware targeting Mac users with the emergence of Pureit in early April. This particular piece of adware had previously targeted Microsoft Windows for a few years, I think since 2014 or something like that, and it proved to be a considerable nuisance for Mac users who got infected. Because instead of just setting one or two files, changing your homepage or your search settings like most adware does, Pureit would create a hidden user account on infected systems. And then it would set up a local proxy server to inject ads in web pages without some of the taking some of the steps that would normally be more easily fixable. So it was annoying and more difficult to remove than other adware. It could have been a lot worse. The way that it worked, taking complete control over the system to set up that user account and the proxy, it could have just as easily been installing keyloggers, stealing personal data, doing all sorts of bad stuff. So the fact that it was just injecting ads and being really annoying was a good thing in this case. There were also several new variants of previously known Mac adware that were detected in the wild this past year, some of which used encryption or code obfuscation, trying to hide their bad behavior from malware researchers. Basically, the way that works is when the adware author is creating their adware app, they're making it so it's really hard for security researchers to understand what the code is doing when they're analyzing it. It's a technique that's well known with malware, viruses, stuff like that. So it kind of shows that the adware authors for Mac are getting a bit more serious about kind of guarding their secrets and staying off the radar as much as possible.
Item number 3 on the list is actually 3 different things, and I kind of want to put it in the everything old is new again column. Trojans and spyware and backdoors. I feel like I could have heard about all of those in the movie from the 1990s called Hackers, I think it was, or some other. I can't remember. These are not new terms, and yet you're saying that these are big news terms for 2016.
Yep, definitely are. Ransomware and adware weren't the only threats targeting Mac users in 2016, which also saw its fair share of other threats, both new and old. The first one on our list here is one called Ocean Lotus, previously overlooked Mac threat. It made the news mid-February when it was quote-unquote rediscovered. It turned out the threat had been identified by a Chinese security firm back in 2015, but because their original research paper was published in Chinese, it flew right over the head of the Mac security vendors. Ocean Lotus was part of a targeted attack, so the majority of Mac users thankfully avoided this infection before it was rediscovered. Second on the list, Eleanor Trojan. The Eleanor Trojan came disguised as an app called EasyDoc Converter in early July and had apparently been available for quite some time before that on a popular Mac download site, or a couple of them. Instead of converting documents, the malware took complete control of the infected system, pilfering data, accessing the webcam, and installing backdoor components. There's another one, Mox. It's a cross-platform backdoor. This was discovered in early September. This particular backdoor was able to steal data, capture screenshots and keystrokes, and execute arbitrary commands on infected systems. Another Trojan horse that appeared in late September, disguised as a PDF document, the Complex Trojan, arrived by the way of phishing emails that appeared to target aerospace agencies. Most likely, the goal of this targeted attack was exfiltration of sensitive data.
I'm sorry, you mean stealing?
Yeah, stealing.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. While some of these Trojan horses were clearly part of some specific targeted attack, and thus less likely to affect the average Mac user, some were not so discriminating and showed, once again, that even trusted Mac download sites can be unwitting distributors of malware.
I'd be curious, well, you say trusted Mac. How do you know? I mean, is this now up to those trusted Mac sites? I don't know which site you're talking about. I'm not going to ask you to name them because I don't want to besmirch them. I mean, if one bad piece of software got through, then I don't think we spend the rest of our lives saying, oh, don't go to that site because that one bad piece of software got through. I guess the question I have is, I mean, are we all, even when you're talking about a trusted site, I mean, are we all sort of, I mean, I don't want to say we're rolling the dice, but I mean, what do you do when a trusted site suddenly gets hit or when a trusted site becomes a vector point?
It depends. I think you're right when you say if it happens once, do you give it a pass? In the past, Mac users have turned their backs on some download sites, especially when those sites started bundling adware with the downloads, modifying what the developers were submitting to the site in the first place. That'll get you blacklisted pretty quickly for the majority of Mac users. I would say, once or twice, especially if it was something kind of obscure, isn't any reason to completely give up on a site. But if you're seeing repeated or intentional stuff like including adware with other downloads, then it's time to maybe look elsewhere.
Or ask them what they're doing to protect their users as well.
You would expect, I would think that, I mean, any site that was doing that was suddenly having a problem would want to be front and center about what they're doing. I mean, I would expect that going to a site that's had 2 or 3 problems, the next time I go to that site, assuming I give them a next time, the first thing I'm going to see on their screen is, here's what we're doing now.
That would be a good idea. But it really just depends on what they're going to do and whether or not it's going to be swept under the rug or how mainstream the vector attack was for the users.
Bug bounty programs are nothing new, but they were until this year pretty much unheard of for Apple. I know there had been a lot of people who had said that this was something Apple should do. And in 2016, they finally listened. Talk to me about Apple's bug bounty program.
Well, in early August, Apple finally joined the ranks of companies that offered bug bounty programs. Microsoft, Facebook, Google, other companies had bug bounty programs that offered rewards for identifying security flaws in apps and systems for years. It's a really good way for companies to find out the problems with their software and get fixes in place and not have a bunch of users end up with malware. So they're really a good thing overall. They do have some strict rules when it comes to getting a payout. Security researchers have to keep their findings private, basically not posting online saying, hey, Apple's got this huge security hole and here's how you exploit it and they're going to pay me some money because I told them. It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. They have to give the company the specific set of steps needed to exploit a given vulnerability, including proof of concept code when applicable. They can't double dip. They can't sell the details of the exploit to one of the third-party exploit vendors and also submit it to Apple or whatever company's bug bounty program. The company will usually request a certain amount of time to patch the bug. And that can take months, depending on the severity of the bug, if it's important, not as important. During that time period, the security researcher can't disclose the details. They have to wait until the bug is patched. Now, Apple had held out for years on offering a program like this. The end result was that security researchers, hackers, anybody who was looking for security holes in Apple's products were ending up just selling them to the third-party exploit vendors. Those exploit vendors don't necessarily have user security in mind. Those exploits are used for targeted attacks by governments or countries, spyware, corporate espionage, all sorts of bad stuff. So Apple opening up a bug bounty program is a really good thing for users overall. The one thing that is unique, however, about Apple's program is it's invite-only. So for now, unless you're on this exclusive list of Mac security researchers, you can't cash in on your discovery. If it's bad enough, contacting Apple will probably get you inducted into that little list. But for now, it's not open to any and everybody like I think almost all the other bug bounty programs are.
Why would that be the case? Because, I mean, you just said you can't cash in on it. Sure you can. Your money is not going to come from Apple, though. Your money is going to come from the third parties that you were talking about earlier, the ones who may not have everybody's best interest in heart. Is there a reason that Apple wouldn't make it open, that they would limit it to an invitation-only list?
Yeah. The reasoning I heard, and I don't know how accurate it is, but in the security circles, it was that Apple was looking to minimize random people claiming bugs that didn't exist or not providing accurate proof of concept code or the steps to recreate the bug. They were just kind of looking to avoid the hassle and headache of a bunch of people submitting what may or may not be a real bug. They wanted to stick with real security researchers who knew how bug bounty programs work, do appropriate and correct and secure research, can report in ways that make sense. So it was probably because they have a smaller security team at Apple. They don't want to be overwhelmed with a bunch of fake or dubious bug bounty claims, that kind of stuff. That's at least what I heard. I don't know how accurate it is. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where Apple goes. It's a big step forward for them to even form a bug bounty program. So hopefully in the future it will be opened up a bit and everybody's security can improve.
So do you think this bug bounty program makes Apple more secure, having the program out there?
It's always going to make a company more secure if the exploits and vulnerabilities are being reported directly to them rather than the company finding out when a new piece of malware hits the wild using that exploit. It's always better for a company to be able to patch a bug or vulnerability before it's being actively exploited in the wild. Always. So yes, it's going to improve security. The one point of contention is that Apple's payouts were rather low compared to some of the third-party exploit vendors. So I think Apple's payout was capped at like $300,000 or something like that for a remote iOS jailbreak, full access, and other vendors, third-party security vendors, in response were upping the price on that kind of bug to $1.5 million. So it's better than nothing that Apple has the program, but because of the way their payout structure works, they're going to miss some of those bugs that will just go to the gray market instead.
Right. People who are looking for the highest bidder rather than people who are looking for a little money for doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Well, it'll be cool to see how this program evolves.
All right. One last item on the checklist this week. File vault password bypass and security going forward. I don't know if it's because the holidays are upon us, but somehow I missed this story just over the past week or so. What's going on?
Well, it was a really recent story. Even here at the end of the year, it's not pulling any punches when it comes to Mac security. A couple weeks ago, mid-December, it was revealed that Apple's recent release of macOS 10.12.2 patched an incredibly severe security hole. Basically, a security researcher found a flaw present in earlier versions of macOS Sierra that allowed an attacker to obtain a user's file vault password. The thing that encrypts all the files in the system, keeps everything safe. The attacker would need physical access to the target machine and a $300 Thunderbolt device. Might sound pricey to you or me, but if you're talking, a government or a spy agency or somebody else who wants to get that data, that's nothing. When said device was plugged into a locked or sleeping Mac, it would check specific locations in the computer's memory where the file vault password was being temporarily stored in plain text. Fully readable, not encrypted. In a demonstration video, the security researcher who discovered the flaw was able to retrieve the password from a locked Mac in under 30 seconds. So it's quick. It was dangerous, not a good thing. In this case, that security researcher did the right thing, contacted Apple right away, didn't talk about it publicly, gave Apple a chance to fix the bug, and then they got to do all the press and fun stuff on alerting everybody to that issue. Throughout the rest of 2016, Apple spent the year releasing numerous updates, security patches, fixing all sorts of bugs and vulnerabilities and exploits. Too many to list. I mean, there were over 50 in almost every single update. So they were doing their best to stay on top of these security issues before they can affect the majority of end users. But again, it's important here at the end of the year to note to our listeners that they need to be proactive in installing these updates and patches in order to stay protected. With malware authors trying new techniques to infect Mac users over the course of the past year, we're definitely going to be seeing more of the same in 2017. So hitting back on some of the key things we've pushed throughout the lifetime of this podcast so far is following some best practices, making backups on a regular basis. Your important files are too important to lose. Stay up to date with those updates and security patches for your operating system, for your apps, and keep an ear out for security news.
Yeah, I mean, and there are a number of ways to keep an ear out for security news. A lot of people who listen to this show know that I do a generally speaking, daily Apple news show called macOS Can. I don't often do security news there unless it's gargantuan, but there are security channels, I guess, with which you can keep up. The guys from Secure Mac actually are on Twitter. We've never talked about that before, but you won't believe the name. It's really confusing. It is at Secure Mac. Okay, so it's really not terribly confusing, but you can find at Secure Mac on Twitter. That'll not only give you updates on sort of breaking security stories, but it'll also remind you when the next episode of the checklist hits. And of course, they're posting everything, not only news as it happens, but news. I mean, if you want to go back and check some stories from 2016 or even earlier, there is a news site for Secure Mac. It is securemac.com/news. securemac.com/news. For this show, if you want to check out past episodes, securemac.com/checklist is the way to do that. Again, that is securemac.com/checklist. And finally, if you would like to get in touch with us, maybe you've got a question you want to ask, a news story you want to suggest, maybe you just want to say Happy New Year, the email address is checklist@securemac.com. That is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, remember this. You are listening to The Checklist by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.